Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today our mission takes us a little bit out of the purely abstract world of Athenian thought.
Right.
We're heading to the streets of southern Italy and Sicily, what the Greeks called Magna Graecia.
The Great Greece.
Exactly. And we're diving deep into this surprisingly pragmatic truth, how the high-minded philosophy of Plato and Aristotle was actually used.
You mean used to build real working political systems?
Yes, real systems on the ground.
That's right. And it's a key point because when you hear the word oligarchy today, you immediately picture, tyranny and exploitation.
A very negative connotation.
A very negative one. But in Magna Graecia, especially in colonial hubs like Croton or Sybaris, oligarchy was seen as a complex practical system.
Yeah, practical how?
It was a framework, one designed to create stability and prosperity by limiting leadership to those who supposedly had the virtue, the expertise, and the resources to do the job right.
So we're really looking at governance as a kind of specialized management. The elite weren't just the richest. They were supposed to be the most qualified.
The best technocrats, yeah. Educated, according to these deep philosophical principles.
Our goal, then, is to see the actual blueprints they adapted. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with that intellectual foundation that had to, make the trip across the sea.
Right, and we have to start with the two heavyweights who really established the principles for civic order. Now, I know our audience knows the Republic. But the key takeaway here isn't the idealism.
Not the philosopher came.
No, not that. It's the premise of legitimacy. Legitimacy through education and virtue.
Right. Plato's whole argument was that a legitimate ruler had to prove their moral character, their intellectual rigor.
Through that extensive training, yeah.
And ethics, mathematics, dialectics. It wasn't about who had the most land. It was about who had the mental discipline to rule for the common good.
Exactly. And that set a baseline standard. It said that governance requires specialized knowledge. But, Plato's perfect state was just too rigid for the messy reality of colonial life.
And that's where Aristotle comes in. He provides that essential bridge.
He was the empiricist. He didn't just dream up a perfect state from scratch.
No. He studied dozens of existing ones.
Precisely. And his work in politics and the Nicomachean ethics, it introduces that crucial concept of the golden mean.
The middle way.
The middle way.
Yeah.
Politically, this meant the best system wasn't an extreme. It had to balance the demands of the many democracy against the stability that the few could provide. Oligarchy.
Trying to steer clear of tyranny on one side and just chaotic mob rule on the other.
And crucially, Aristotle knew the Constitution had to fit the community. So if you were a thriving trading port, maybe full-blown democracy wasn't the best fit if it meant slow, unstable decisions.
Okay, so if we tie this all together, the shared philosophical legacy gave these colonies the justification they needed.
The intellectual justification, yes. Legitimacy came from virtue, from education, and from a supposed commitment to community service. But the question is still there, isn't it? How did these lofty ideals survive the transition from theory to actual policy?
Let's look at that context then. Magna Graecia. We're talking about the 8th to the 5th centuries BCE. A kind of Greek diaspora.
And these were not poor little outposts. They were thriving urban centers that, in many cases, outshone their mother cities back in Greece.
What's so interesting to me is that they weren't just cookie-cutter copies of Athens or Sparta.
No, not at all. The governance structures they built were hybrids. They were a mix of Greek political theory, local Italian customs, and, this is the most important part, the material realities on the ground.
And those local realities, it seems, just screamed oligarchy. Why did that specific form of rule become so dominant there?
Well, a few practical drivers all came together at once. First, just distance.
They were on their own.
Completely. They were too far from Athens to feel the political pressure to adopt democracy. Second, you have the land itself. The coastal plains were incredibly fertile.
Which means agricultural wealth.
And that wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few big land-owning families. These existing aristocracies became the natural power base.
And you throw in the commerce factor. They were huge maritime powers.
Yes. And maritime trade, international diplomacy, it all requires stable, predictable governance. You just can't manage complex shipping routes if your government changes every 6 months based on the mood of the assembly.
So small, concentrated councils could provide that consistency.
They could. Plus, there was a constant military threat from neighboring Italian tribes. That demanded swift, coordinated defense, which is just easier with centralized leadership.
So it sounds like the region's prosperity, this balance of farming and commerce,
Yeah.
didn't just tolerate rule by the elite, it almost required it for efficiency.
That's a perfect way to put it. The economic need justified the philosophical structure. Now, we can see how this actually played out in specific cities.
Okay, let's do it. Where should we start? Sybaris. The city so famous for luxury, its name basically means luxury.
Sybaris is such a great paradox. Its wealth was built on this extraordinary agriculture from the Crathis River Valley.
Right.
So their oligarchy became obsessed with one thing: stability. They had to maintain this equilibrium between massive farming operations and their trade routes. I mean, the sheer scale of their opulence was legendary.
I've heard the stories about laws against noisy trades near home.
Exactly. So to protect that wealth, they needed an incredibly disciplined, stable government. It was like an Aristotelian idea of moderation, but applied to governance, not lifestyle. Stability was the moderation they needed to protect abundance.
That's a fantastic insight. Excessive wealth demanding excessively stable governance. But if we want to see where philosophy truly became policy, we have to look at Croton.
Oh, absolutely. Croton's entire political life was shaped by Pythagorean thought. And this wasn't just some philosophy school.
It was more like a religious order, right?
Right. It was effectively a religious and ethical order that governed the state. The principles: mathematical harmony, strict ethical discipline, communal responsibility, they permeated the ruling council.
So the leaders weren't just, quoting Pythagoras. They were living by his strict code.
Precisely. The ruling elite lived almost as a commune. They had strict diets, performed daily philosophical inquiries into justice. They weren't just politicians. They were positioned as philosopher guardians.
A direct echo of Plato.
A direct echo, yes. They legitimized their power by claiming superior moral and intellectual discipline. It was a cult of knowledge, really.
So while that's happening in Croton, what about Toronto?
Toronto, or Tarentum, used its amazing coastal position to become the main maritime power in the whole area. Their oligarchic councils were laser-focused on commercial skill and naval strategies.
So less about moral philosophy and more about practical expertise.
Exactly. Their whole structure was built for speed and coordination, managing trade deals, mobilizing the fleet. The virtue they needed wasn't so much moral superiority, but real competency in business and defense.
And finally, what about Syracuse? It always seems to be the most politically messy of the bunch.
Syracuse developed this really complex model where power was intentionally distributed among several powerful families, the Gameroi.
So they shared power.
They shared it through negotiated deals. Each family controlled specific assets, grain, ports, troops, while also participating in a collective, but still very restricted, governing body. It was a conscious attempt, even among the rich, to reflect that Greek ideal of checked power.
To stop any one dynasty from getting too powerful.
For a while, at least.
It's clear this power wasn't just held by force. It was consolidated through some really sophisticated institutional control. Let's dig into those pillars of legitimacy: wealth, religion, and education.
Right, because to hold on to power, the oligarchy had to control the infrastructure of society itself. And you can see that with religion. The temples in Magna Graecia were way more than just spiritual centers.
They were. What, like administrative hubs?
Financial, administrative, civic hubs, all of it. The priestly elites were basically the original civil servants.
So the priests were managing public records.
Managing records, overseeing huge land endowments, arbitrating disputes, and, critically, acting as early public treasurers, as bankers. Their authority wasn't just divine.
It was practical.
It was functional, pragmatic expertise. This aligned the religious institutions directly with the oligarchic power structure.
And this leads right to the main barrier to entry: education.
Oh, education was the backbone of identity for the ruling class. It focused on philosophical inquiry, ethical training, and of course, rigorous physical discipline through athletics.
It's that classic Greek connection again, isn't it?
Yeah.
Bodily excellence equals moral character.
It is. The idea that only those who master themselves can master the state. It reinforced their legitimacy perfectly. By demanding qualifications that only the wealthiest could afford, they could argue their rule was based on skill, not just inherited status.
Even though the two were completely linked.
Intrinsically linked, which takes us back to the ground floor of it all.
The economic foundation.
The control of wealth was just absolute. They created a self-perpetuating system where only property-owning men who met these super high wealth thresholds could make decisions.
And they controlled all the key economic drivers.
Everything. The ports, the massive agricultural estates, the early banking, the merchant guilds. everything.
So their political stability was, it was directly proportional to their economic control.
It was. If they could guarantee good harvests and safe shipping, they proved they were competent to rule. The philosophy was almost just window dressing for that practical reality.
What's amazing is how successful they were at maintaining that image of competent leadership. And that model had a lasting impact, didn't it?
It left an undeniable blueprint. This whole pragmatic approach where power is concentrated but theoretically balanced by expertise and civic duty, you can see its influence later on.
Right.
You see echoes of it in the Roman Republic's administrative structures, in the way medieval Italian communes were governed, and I think most clearly in the stable councils of Renaissance Venice.
That's fascinating. But speaking of foundations, I think the idea of urban planning as philosophical instruction is it's mind-blowing. They literally built their philosophy into the cities.
We did. The physical environment was a teacher. The agora, the central square, was designed to be both a marketplace and a forum for debate.
So it forces that connection between business and civic thought.
It creates a forced intersection, yes. And look at the architecture. Those colonnaded walkways weren't just for decoration. They encouraged contemplation and discussion as you move through the city.
And the temples and theaters right next to the government building.
It's a constant reminder that governance isn't just bureaucracy. It's a sacred cultural duty that requires order and virtue, a physical manifestation of Platonic ideals.
What's so remarkable, then, is that these oligarchies weren't just about elite domination. They were sophisticated, often successful political laboratories. They were trying to balance economic prosperity with intellectual ideals and religious legitimacy.
All funneled through the hands of a restricted, highly educated leadership class.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, today?
Well, I think the Magna Graecian experience shows that concentrated leadership, when it's successfully tied to philosophical principles and a real pragmatic need for stability, can create societies that achieve incredible things, both materially and culturally.
It forces you to look at these historical systems with a bit more nuance.
A lot more nuance, yeah, rather than just dismissing them with our modern moral judgments.
It's a great reminder that stability and legitimacy are often pretty complex.
And the final thought I'd want to leave you with is this. These Greek city-states were running these continuous high-stakes experiments in how to organize people. And you can benefit from studying how they handled the trade-off between, say, speed, stability, and broad participation.
That's a trade-off we still deal with.
Absolutely. They recognize that effective governance almost always requires balancing lofty idealism with pragmatic, ground-level constraints, a challenge that remains completely central to every political system struggling for legitimacy today.